I never believed in ghosts. Not really. Sure, I heard the stories. Whispers in the dark, unexplained shadows. The occasional cold spot in an otherwise warm room. But I always chalked it up to overactive imaginations or the mind playing tricks in the dead of night. That was before I set foot inside Halewood Textile Mill, a factory abandoned decades ago, but still very much alive. I wasn't there for ghost hunting or chasing legends, I was there for work. As a freelance urban explorer and documentarian, my job was simple: find forgotten places, capture their decay, and tell their stories to the world. The Halewood Mill was just another stop, another place left to rot, another piece of history on the verge of disappearing. Or so I thought. The factory was massive. 3 floors of rusted machinery, shattered windows, and walls stained with time. The smell of old oil and damp concrete clung to the air. And the deeper I walked in, the heavier the silence became. Not the kind of silence you find in an empty building. No, this was different. This was the kind of silence that listened. My footsteps echoed through the hollow space as I stepped over fallen beams and discarded tools, my flashlight cutting through the thick dust floating in the air. I glanced around, taking in the remnants of a place that once buzzed with life. Old sewing machines sat in neat rows, rusting away in the dim light. Unfinished rolls of fabric lay scattered across the floor. Their once vibrant colors now faded to dull shades of gray and brown. On one of the walls, a massive clock was frozen at exactly 3:12 a.m. Odd, but the strangest part? Everything felt untouched, as if the workers had simply vanished in the middle of their shift, leaving everything behind. I had explored many abandoned places before, but none felt quite like this. As I moved deeper inside, I spotted an old time clock machine near the entrance. The kind workers once used to punch in and out. The last punched card was still inside, yellowed with age, but the ink was clear. April 16th, 1987. Clocked in, 7:45 p.m. Clocked out. The slot where the clock-out time should have been was empty. I frowned. It could have been a simple mistake. A worker who forgot to clock out before leaving for the night. But something about it unsettled me. I slipped the card back into its place and turned to continue filming. That's when I noticed it. A single sewing machine at the far end of the room. Its wheel was moving. Not fast, not loud. Just a slow, steady turn. The kind you make when testing an old machine, pressing the pedal lightly. But there was no one there. A chill ran down my spine. My first instinct was to rationalize it. Maybe the wind? A rat scurrying underneath? But the floor was still, and the air was dead silent. I took a step closer, my camera rolling, documenting every detail. The machine stopped the moment I moved. Just like that. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was a sensation I couldn't explain, but it was strong, as if the building itself was aware of me, watching, waiting. And then I heard it. A footstep, not mine, not an echo. A deliberate heavy step coming from the second floor. I looked up, my flashlight tracing along the rusted metal railing of the upper level. Nothing, but I swear, I wasn't alone in that factory. I took a deep breath, steadied my hands, and whispered to myself, "It's just an old building. Just the wind. Just your mind playing tricks." But deep down, I already knew. I stood frozen beneath the rusted metal railing of the second floor, my heart pounding in my ears. The sound of that footstep still echoed in my mind. It had been real. Too real. I swallowed hard, adjusting my grip on the camera. I needed to check it out. If I turned back now, my mind would haunt me more than anything lurking in this abandoned factory. Step by step, I climbed the rusted staircase. The metal creaked under my weight, each sound amplified by the eerie stillness around me. As I reached the landing, my flashlight flickered for the first time that night. That's when I smelled it. A strange, acrid scent, something like burnt fabric mixed with old metal. The air was heavier up here, dense with an unshakable presence. The second floor was lined with storage racks, each filled with dust-covered crates and forgotten tools. A few sewing tables were scattered around, their chairs either missing or overturned. And then I saw it. A row of footprints in the thick dust, leading away from the stairs, straight toward the far end of the factory. They weren't mine. Someone, or something, had been walking here. I crouched down, tracing my fingers over the disturbed dust, barefoot. The prints were narrow, slender, like a woman's. But they stopped abruptly, as if whoever made them had vanished into thin air. I exhaled shakily, forcing myself to keep moving. The further I walked, the colder it got. My breath started to fog up in front of me. Then, nothing. The image was gone. The hallway was empty again. I stumbled back, my breathing ragged. This wasn't my imagination. This was real. A sudden noise shattered the silence. A chair scraping against the floor. It came from a nearby office, just a few feet away. The door was slightly ajar, its glass window cracked. Slowly, I reached out, pushing it open with my foot. Inside, the office was just as abandoned as the rest of the factory, except for the desk. A single ledger book lay open, its pages curled with age. The ink was faded, but one name stood out among the old employee records. Eleanor Finch, seamstress. My stomach twisted. I knew that name. Before coming here, I had done some research. Eleanor Finch was one of the workers who disappeared the night of the factory fire in 1987. No remains were ever found. And yet, her name was here, in front of me. Fresh ink, as if it had just been written. A loud bang jolted me back to reality. The door behind me had slammed shut on its own. I turned back toward the desk. The ledger was gone, vanished. My breathing grew uneven. I needed to get out of here. But just as I reached for the door handle, my flashlight died. And in that absolute darkness, I heard breathing. Right, next, to Mr. Then. A cold, skeletal hand touched my shoulder, and the whisper returned. I couldn't breathe. The sensation of that ice-cold hand on my shoulder sent a bolt of terror through my spine. It wasn't just cold. It was unnatural, numbing, as if every ounce of warmth was being drained from my body. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my muscles locked in place, paralyzed by fear. And then the whisper came again. "You're not supposed to be here." The voice was closer this time, right next to my ear. I could almost feel a breath, damp and heavy, sending shivers down my neck. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the hand was gone. The air shifted, the suffocating pressure in the room lifting slightly. My flashlight flickered back on, the weak beam cutting through the darkness. The office was empty, but something was wrong. The room wasn't the same. The desk, the filing cabinets, the broken clock on the wall, they had all changed. Before, they were covered in dust, left to decay over the years. Now everything looked new. The papers were crisp, the wooden desk polished, the glass window unbroken. I turned around slowly, dread settling into my bones. I wasn't in the abandoned factory anymore. I had been pulled back in time. A faint glow seeped in from the corridor, the flickering light of old factory lamps, casting long shadows along the walls. And then I heard it, the rhythmic hum of sewing machines. I stepped forward, my boots no longer crunching over debris. Instead, the floor beneath me felt solid, clean, alive. I moved toward the corridor and peered around the corner, and my breath caught in my throat. The factory floor was full of workers, men and women, dressed in old, faded uniforms, sat at their sewing stations, working tirelessly under the dim yellow light. They didn't notice me. They just kept working, their heads down, hands moving in mechanical precision. The air smelled of hot fabric, machine oil, and something burnt. A strange static noise filled my ears, like an old radio struggling to tune in. Then, the room glitched. For a fraction of a second, everything changed. The workers weren't workers anymore. Their uniforms were scorched, their flesh charred and peeling. Some had gaping holes where their eyes should have been. Others had mouths stretched open in silent screams. Their fingers twitched over the machines, bones exposed where skin had burned away. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, everything snapped back. The workers were normal again. The machines hummed like before. But now I knew what I was looking at. Ghosts. Echoes of the past, trapped in this decaying factory, repeating the final moments of their lives. A cold sweat ran down my back. I needed to get out of here. Now I turned on my heel, ready to run back toward the stairs. But the factory floor had changed again. The once calm workers had stopped moving. Every single one of them was now staring at me. Hundreds of eyes, unblinking, hollow, wrong. Then, in unison, they all did something that made my blood run cold. They smiled. Not a normal smile. A twisted, eerie grin, their lips stretching too far, teeth jagged and unnatural. A voice rose above the humming machines. "He sees us." Then another voice. "He shouldn't be here." The whispering grew louder, overlapping, distorting. "He sees us. He shouldn't be here. He shouldn't be here." The factory erupted into chaos. The sewing machines screamed to life, their wheels spinning violently. Lights burst overhead, showering the floor with sparks. The workers began to rise from their seats, their bodies jerking unnaturally, as if controlled by invisible strings. I didn't wait. I ran. I awoke to darkness. Cold, suffocating, and oppressive. My head throbbed as if I had been struck by a hammer. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or how I got there. Slowly, I lifted my hand to my face, feeling the sticky sweat on my forehead, my breath ragged in the stale air. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. They trembled beneath me like wet paper, forcing me to kneel on the ground. And then a soft, distant sound began to filter through the darkness. Whispers. Not the same whispers I'd heard earlier. These were different. They were clearer, closer. They called my name, dragging it out like a chant. My own name, spoken by hundreds of voices, overlapping and blending together in a maddening cacophony. Kyle. Kyle. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt like it was closing up, suffocating under the pressure of the voices. They grew louder, more insistent, their tones twisted with malice. "Kyle, you shouldn't have come." The ground beneath me began to vibrate, a low hum resonating through my bones. The factory seemed alive again. Alive in a way that shouldn't be possible. I felt a shift in the air, a ripple of energy, and suddenly the walls around me were no longer dark. I blinked. and the factory reappeared, just as it had been before. The sorrowful glow of dying lamps flickered above me, casting elongated shadows across the floor. But something was different. Something was off. I looked around, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The machinery that had once been still now hummed with life. The sewing machines clicked rhythmically, though no one was operating them. And then I saw her again. Eleanor Finch. She stood at the far end of the factory floor, her figure outlined in a cold, eerie light. Her face, frozen in that unnatural grin, twisted with something that almost resembled triumph. She took a step forward, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to creak and groan, as if the factory itself was reacting to her every movement. The voices were louder now. They were coming from everywhere, from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. It was like the factory was alive, a living entity, feeding off the souls trapped within its walls. "You're one of us now." Her voice rang through my mind, clear and icy, sending a shock of terror through me. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, as I tried to make sense of what was happening. I could still hear the voices, the hum of the machines, the screeching of the walls. But there was something else now. A presence. A pressure in the air that felt like a heavy hand on my chest. The factory was no longer just an abandoned building. It was a prison. And I was trapped inside it. I turned around frantically, searching for an exit. But every doorway I tried was blocked, sealed shut with rusted iron bars, unmovable, impervious to my touch. I was completely trapped. That's when I saw the other figures, the workers. They were no longer just ghosts. They were wraiths, twisted by the fire, their bodies contorted in unnatural poses. Some of them were staring directly at me, their hollow eyes burning with hatred. Others moved toward me, dragging their feet, their faces hidden by the blackened remnants of their skin. And then I saw the fire. It began as a faint glow in the distance, but quickly grew larger, engulfing the far corner of the factory. I felt a rush of heat blast against my face as the flames began to spread, crawling up the walls, licking the ceiling. The fire wasn't natural. It wasn't just flames. It was alive, flickering and twisting like a demonic force. I ran toward the exit again, desperate, knowing that the flames were closing in. The fire was chasing me. It was hunting me. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape. The walls shifted again, closing in around me, trapping me in a maze of twisted corridors. The fire followed, just behind me, licking at my heels with every step. The air grew hotter, the heat unbearable, as if I were being suffocated by the flames themselves. I stumbled, my feet giving way beneath me. And then, for a brief moment, everything stopped. The factory fell silent. The fire halted in its tracks. The workers, the whispers, the machines, everything disappeared. I was alone, and then I heard her, Eleanor Finch. Her voice was soft now, almost sympathetic. "You can't leave, Kyle. This is your fate now. This is your home. Forever." I felt the weight of her words crash down on me like a physical blow. My chest tightened. My mind went blank. And the reality of the situation finally sank in. There was no escape, no way out. I turned back toward the fire, feeling the heat closing in once again. The oppressive weight of the factory surrounding me. And then I ran. I don't know how long I ran for. The factory twisted and turned around me, the walls closing in, shifting, changing, distorting into shapes I couldn't recognize. The fire burned hotter, The heat unbearable. The air was thick with smoke and ash, choking me with every breath. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I found myself standing before a massive door. The iron handle was cold to the touch, but I didn't hesitate. I gripped it tightly, yanking with all my strength, until the door opened and I was out. I stumbled into the night, gasping for air, the cool breeze biting at my skin. The factory loomed behind me, silent and still. The flames were gone. The voices were gone. But as I looked back one last time, I saw her standing in the doorway. Eleanor Finch. Her grin never faltered. You can't escape. Not really. The door slammed shut behind me, and I was left standing alone in the dark. The factory was gone, but I knew that it hadn't really ended. It would never end. I'd be back. The factory had claimed me, and it would never let me go.